All right. My name's Jim Dossey, and I am a partner at Dossey and Jones law firm in Conroe, Texas. And I am going to tell you today about the Corporate Transparency Act. This is the second presentation that I've done on this. Some of the materials that we talked about in the first presentation, we will repeat those a little bit, but today the intent is to go a little bit deeper and tell you about what's going to be required, when, and hopefully how we're going to uh, go forward with trying to comply with this new law. As I was mentioning to everybody on the call before, this is definitely one of those don't shoot the messenger kind of things. I actually had a client after the first presentation that I did. Uh, I do his estate planning, and he had reached out to his corporate attorney, and he said, "Hey, have you heard about this?" And the corporate attorney said to him, "This has got to be a scam." And my client said, "No, Jim Dossey told me about this, and so it must not. Jim doesn't usually say stuff that isn't right about that." And so the next day, his corporate attorney came back to him and said, "I can't believe it. This is real." So lots of people don't know about this and are hearing about it for the first time. And so, anyways, hopefully we can kind of give you a little bit of clarity on what how you comply with this and who's going to be subject to this new requirement. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of the Corporate Transparency Act. I want to kind of give you an idea about what entities are going to be subject to the new regulations. We're also going to talk about some reporting requirements and also what happens if you don't comply. Okay, so the Corporate Transparency Act, it actually comes from some rules that were in place over in Europe. Uh, Probably about 2 to 3 years ago, the legislature enacted these new regulations coming from Europe. And if you've ever tried to open up a company out of the United States, you would know that there are extremely long and laborious regulations and information that you have to provide when you open up a new company. I've done this several times, and one of the things that until now, you didn't really have to file anything with the government in order to provide information about the ownership of those companies. Well, apparently, the United States has become kind of a hub for money laundering. And so the government has enacted these new regulations as a way um, to to address that growing money laundering and basically go after the bad guys, anti-terrorism, anti-money laundering. FinCEN is a group under Treasury. So if you can imagine in the corporate government, Treasury is a department. The IRS is also in Treasury, and FinCEN is kind of a sister organization of the IRS. And that who is actually the one that's the group that's enacting these new regulations. What's been kind of interesting is that not a lot of people have heard about this. Now that we're getting kind of close to the deadlines to comply, we've seen lots of other service providers starting to go out and talk to their clients about this. But FinCEN has not contacted anyone. And so it's just your normal everyday person has no idea that this is actually happening. It's not like the IRS. When you get something in the mail from the IRS, you tend to open it. Not so with FinCEN. They haven't sent anything out, and so it's been kind of up to the service providers to start, like us, to try to get that information out to the public. So let's talk about who actually this is going to apply to. In essence, if it is a filing entity, so If you have filed something with the state of Texas or Delaware or Florida, with any kind of state to form the entity, it most likely applies to you. There are a few exceptions to the rule, and we'll go through those, but for the most part, it's every filing entity. So as you can kind of imagine, this can be any number of different kinds of companies. This can be a single member LLC. It can be a family limited partnership that a family uses for family investments. It could be just your simple print shop corporation or your local tire shop. If they have a filing entity, they are subject to this. In other words, it's basically everybody. The FinCEN has a website that has a very detailed question and answer section to it. And so they actually have this flow chart up on their frequently asked questions section. And so it's kind of instructive to go through this. First question is, under what law was the company created? Because there are different rules on whether it's a foreign country or whether it's a U.S. Filing state. If it's a corporation, if it's an LLC, or if it was formed under any other kind of entity, if it was formed with the state of Texas, Secretary of State, it may be a domestic reporting company. Basically everybody, as I was mentioning. There are some exceptions to the rule. For example, trusts are not generally filing entities. So what's interesting about that is that if you have formed trust before, we do lots of trusts, you don't actually file trust with any kind of Secretary of State. But one of the things that we'll talk about is that even though the trust itself is not a filing entity, the trust can be a beneficial owner, which would then be part of information that would be provided as a owner of an LLC. Basically, some of these exceptions that you'll see relate to companies that already have to provide significant information to the government. So a company that is issuing new securities, for example, there's a very long and laborious process and lots of information that has to be provided for public companies if you go public. Insurance companies, banks, governmental authorities, those all have to provide lots of information to the government already as far as ownership and detailed information about that. Tax exempt entities, charities, those are all exempt. This is not going to apply to them. There's also something called a large operating company, which basically means if it has over $5 million of revenue and more than 20 employees, those two things together, then you're defined as a large operating company. Those are all exceptions to the rule and don't have to comply with this new CTA regulation. As you can probably imagine, that's the vast majority of entities it still would apply to. And I think I've seen some preliminary numbers of something like 30 million entities that this is going to apply to in the United States. Okay, so there's some important concepts that we kind of have to talk about when we think about who has to actually, what information is going to be provided to FinCEN under this rule. The first is something called a company applicant. So this is the person that actually files the entity with the Secretary of State. And so this could be a lawyer, they're paralegal, it could be a CPA. Sometimes people have their CPAs file entities. And so for any entity that's filed after January 1st, 2024, information on the company applicant will also have to be provided with the application, which that kind of comes, kind of adds some interesting questions as to why that information is required. And it's going to be permanently part of the record. So once you form a company, you will always be the company applicant, and your information will always be there, even if the client isn't using you anymore. And so this, as I mentioned, this is the person that actually files the document to register the company, and it's the person also that is managing that person. So it can be multiple people that that would have to file as the company applicant. Okay, the second major concept that we need to talk about are the beneficial owners. And so this is what I've got here on the screen is the actual rule, who beneficial owners are. And it's kind of instructive to go line by line through this to understand who is actually going to be counted as a beneficial owner. The first that you'll see is that initial section there. Directly or indirectly, through any contract, arrangement, understanding, relationship, or otherwise. Well, that's a pretty broad set of people. Basically, anybody who is in control. So you'll see any of those people that either exercise substantial control or owns at least 25% of the ownership interest in the company. And so we're going to go through each one of these and kind of dig into them a little bit, because they could be a little bit deeper than you might think. First thing we're going to talk about is who has substantial control of the company. So if you see here on the right-hand side of the screen, these are some examples of people that might have substantial control. It could be a senior officer in the company, president, CFO, executive suite kind of person, even if they don't have an official title to the company. It could be somebody that has the ability to appoint or remove the authority. So if you think about that, it could be an owner that maybe they only own 1% of the company, but they are the voting shares of the company. Well, then that person would have substantial control if they have the ability to remove the managers of the company. You have important decision makers. So again, this is not necessarily somebody who directly has a title with the company, but has control over the company as to the structure of the company, finances, how the business operates, decision-making ability. And then there's kind of a catch-all, which is basically any other form of substantial control. So the idea is here that if they directly or indirectly have any kind of control over the company, that this information on these people will have to be provided under this regulation to the government. The second little section of that rule is a beneficial owner is somebody who owns or controls at least 25% of the ownership interest of the reporting company. And this is actually a little bit broader than you might think. So obviously, somebody that owns the stock of the company or shares of the company or units of the company, they're an equity or stock or ownership of the company. That's pretty self-explanatory, but it's actually broader than that. So you'll see that capital interests or profits interests are also considered ownership of the company. So sometimes people will set up companies that have carried interests, limited partnerships, and things like that. Those are considered ownership interest in the company. Somebody that has stock options or convertible instruments. So people that have maybe a convertible promissory note that converts into equity interests. It could be somebody that has an option, so an option to purchase shares in a company. So you can kind of see it's not just the people that have actual today ownership of the company, but it could be potential ownership as well. When you start to bring in all of these other kind of convertible options, things like that. So the one special topic that I wanted to address today is also about trusts. So because we're a estate planning law firm, we have many clients that have trusts. And so as I was mentioning earlier, um, the trusts in and of themselves are not reporting entities unless they're actually filed with the Secretary of State. This is really rare. We do have some cases where people will file trusts with the state with a certain state. We don't really do that in Texas and other states that does happen. But if you think about some of those other categories of being a beneficial owner, exercising substantial control or owning at least 25% of that company, well, a trustee certainly has substantial control over the trust, and therefore, if the trust has substantial control over that entity, then information about the trustee would be required to be provided to FinCEN. Some other kind of interesting examples. Sometimes we have trusts where the grantor, the person that creates the trust, has a right to revoke the trust or withdraw assets from the trust. In that case, if the trust itself is a beneficial owner, then information about the grantors would have to be provided as a controlling or beneficial owner of that entity. In special cases, sometimes special trustees are appointed or trust protectors. And again, that kind of depends on how the trust is actually documented. But you would have to have somebody that could go into the trust to understand the trust in order to know if these people have the authority to qualify as a beneficial owner. Okay, so let's kind of talk about the reporting a little bit. The first thing I wanted to talk about was something called a FinCEN identifier. FinCEN identifier is basically a unique piece of information. It's a unique number that you can apply for with FinCEN. And the idea being that if you have multiple entities, you don't have to, for each one, if you get a FinCEN identifier, you submit your information for that. But then for each entity, you're just providing this FinCEN identifier as a beneficial owner that would then be sent in for that particular entity. And this is important if you have multiple entities. But what you'll see here is some information that's also going to be required for each of the entities. So for the reporting company, legal name, trade name, address, tax ID, where it was formed. And then for each of the beneficial owners and the company applicants, legal name, date of birth, current residential address. You have to provide a driver's license or a passport number and an actual picture of the passport or driver's license that goes with it. Pretty scary. Okay, so as I mentioned, this FinCEN identifier is something that you would file for with FinCEN so that, say, if you have a reporting company that is asking you for this information, because they have to gather all this information, the passports, all that information that you really wouldn't want out there in the public. Instead, you can give them a FinCEN identifier that they could then use to file their report with FinCEN. Supposedly, this number is going to be available after January, according to their facts. But one of the things that's going to be interesting is that if any information changes, so say you move your residence, you would then be required within 30 days to update FinCEN, this FinCEN identifier, for any address changes. And so, yeah, that's going to be interesting to see for sure. Okay, let's talk about when these are going to be reportable. For existing entities, we have from January 1st through January 1st, 2025. The one thing I would say, though, is please do not wait until the last minute. Even from our side, to give you an idea of what's going to happen. Our law firm, Dossey and Jones, we have formed literally thousands of entities over the years. And we may not do all of them as part of this, but we're probably going to do a lot. And so if you think, okay, we get 2,000 of these that we're going to do, each one of these is probably going to take an hour to 2 hours worth of time. So, an hour for talking to the client, gathering the information. Half the time the information is going to be wrong, so we have to ask again. There may be some analysis that has to happen. Then doing the report, submitting it to FinCEN. So you can see it's probably an hour to 2 hours worth of work easily for each entity. And when you're talking about thousands of entities that have to be done, we're talking about a significant amount of work that probably all of your CPAs and lawyers are going to have to do at the end of the year, next year. And so I am begging you, please, if you're expecting us to do this work, we are happy to do it. But please do not wait until the last minute, because that is going to be very difficult. As you can probably imagine, we are talking multiple people that we are going to have doing nothing but this at the end of next year. For new companies, the original rule was 30 days after formation, starting in January 1, 2024. But there have been some lobbyists, like the AICPA and others, that have been requesting some relief for this. And so they just recently, actually within the last week, the FinCEN has come out with a revised regulation that at least for 2024, you have 90 days. So if you form a new company in 2024, this report has to be filed within 90 days. After that, if you form a new company in 2025, it's back to 30 days. So not very long. So if you can imagine, that does not give you very much time if you're forming a new entity to do this filing. There's lots of questions about this, as you can probably imagine. Sometimes we run into issues actually getting an EIN. And sometimes if there's a match or we can't get the EIN for some reason, we have to go to the IRS, and it sometimes takes longer than 30 days. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to happen. The second thing, and this is probably as equally kind of an issue, is if there's any change, then you have to report those changes within 30 days. So we kind of mentioned this as part of the change to your information for the FinCEN identifier. But if there are any changes to the beneficial owners, the CEO changes, you have a different ownership, that change in the ownership, anything that could happen to the beneficial owners, you have to submit this change within 30 days. Okay, and here's kind of the interesting thing. Supposedly, there will be an electronic way to submit these reports to FinCEN. We do not have that yet. All that is said on the FinCEN website is that it will be available before January 1st, which is kind of interesting. So we do not even know how We know the when, we know the what, we do not know the how. And so, that's our government at work. So it's kind of interesting. Hopefully we will know before January 1st, hopefully, that this will be something, and knowing how we're going to actually do this. Okay. And again, that information, there should be a form or some way, portal or something on the FinCEN website where they will allow for electronic submission. If you haven't actually been out to the FinCEN website, it's a good website, and it has lots of information. And so I brought it up here on the screen so you can kind of see. And it has some question and answers and general information, but it does not tell you how to file. If you click on this link, it basically says, we will tell you before January 1st. Okay, some other important things that you need to know. I've had some people asking me, okay, well, if we have a parent company or a holding company that owns subsidiaries, do we just file for the holding company? No, you have to file for each individual company, even the subsidiaries, if they qualify as a reporting company. And so, also, these are some other questions that have happened. What likely triggers having to make this update to the rules? So it could be a change in the information that you provided, such as a new name. You get a new DBA or something like that. You change who the CEO is or somebody that's in charge, a change in the ownership, or a change in one of the beneficials' owner's name, address, or unique information provided to FinCEN. So anytime an owner changes their address, then you're required to update the record in FinCEN. So you can imagine this could be quite onerous if you have multiple owners in a business. The FinCEN is quite serious about this as far as compliance goes, and they have said that there are potential monetary penalties and even criminal penalties for people that willfully provide incorrect information. Again, I don't think that they are wanting to go after your mom and pop store or anything. This is really trying to go after the bad guys, but it is true that there are civil and criminal penalties for non-compliance. I've had lots of people that have asked, well, how exactly are they going to do that? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. But if you comply, you do what you're supposed to do, then you won't have to worry about it. Okay, so what do you do now? First thing is to make a plan. As I mentioned, we know what information is going to be provided, or you're going to have to provide, and so that information is known. We don't know how, and so there are a few things that you can do. And as I mentioned, probably the biggest thing is don't wait until the last minute. If you have an existing entity, I know for a fact our law firm will be swamped because of this at the end of next year. And I would imagine that any law firm that is helping clients do this, CPA firm that's helping clients do this, they will also be very swamped in doing this work. And then finally, we have launched a separate company called Venture Vault that many of our clients are a part of. And we are using that as a way to help clients comply with this new rule. So just to kind of give you just a high level overview of what Venture Vault does, it's a separate entity where we monitor your entity status in real time. So with the Secretary of State, lots of people, their entities go in invalid status. We reach out to the clients and generate their annual meeting minutes, store key documents for them, act as a registered agent, and we will develop a system for complying with FinCEN, these new requirements. So as you can see, this is just kind of a screenshot of Venture Vault. We've already been designing it to gather this information, and whenever we have more information from FinCEN about how we can actually submit this information electronically, we're going to implement a system to be able to do that directly from Venture Vault. So what we do know from FinCEN is that they are going to provide what's called an API, an application programming interface, that we can directly upload information into. And so hopefully we'll be able to have that automatic uploading of this information from Venture Vault. So the idea being, as long as you are maintaining your information in Venture Vault, we should be able to do these reports for you. And then finally, I'm going to show you just a very quick presentation of Venture Vault, only a minute long, and then I'm going to open it up for a few questions. All right. I'm sure everybody is feeling very uplifted right now. So what I'm going to do is go to the chat, and if you have questions, then please go ahead and put them in the chat, and we can try to address those questions to the extent that we can. I will be sending out a link to this presentation afterwards, to the presentation itself and also this recording. So we are recording. And so if you want to see it again, or you just like watching me talk, which not that many people do, but you can, then you'll have a link to this. So let's go ahead and go to the questions if there are any. Okay. Question about a series LLC, whether the series LLC has to file for each series, or if it's a single LLC, just one filing. So a series LLC is a kind of LLC where you can put Chinese walls between the assets. Lots of people do these for rentals and other business and real estate investments. At this point, and they haven't said, and we don't really have a full answer to that. Our thought is that it would just be for the single LLC because it's just one ownership. But we will certainly let you know if that changes. Okay, let's go to another question. Can you file the reports yourselves? Yes, you can. So there is nothing, I think FinCEN's idea is that some people will file these on their own. Some people will use service providers, attorneys, and CPAs to do this or help them with it. And so if you feel comfortable in filing that report, you can certainly do it. Okay. Okay. Do beneficial owners need to be reported even if the entity, like a trust, is not a reporting entity? No. So say you have a trust that, as I mentioned, their trust itself is not a reporting entity, then you don't have to report anything. You don't have to report the trustees or the beneficiaries or anything like that for the trust. That said, if the trust owns a reporting entity, then, and that trust is then a beneficial owner, those rules apply to it, then you would have reporting requirements for the beneficial owners within that trust. Okay. I think that was all the other questions. Let's see, a couple others that came in. Okay. So what would be the process for a Texas-based LLC with CT Corp as a registered agent? Oh, well, I think this is more along the lines of Venture Vault. We will get with Carly. We'll get with you later to answer that question as far as how to transfer and what would happen there, as far as registered agent goes. And we can also get with everybody about, we'll send out information more about Venture Vault, the cost and all this stuff, also with our materials that we will provide after the meeting. Okay, let's see if there were any other questions. Okay. If you have more than one company, well, you have to get a separate FinCEN number for each. Yes, each one will have a separate FinCEN ID. They're each a different reporting company, and they will each have to be filed with FinCEN. I guess the one thing that you could do is you can get a FinCEN identifier for the beneficial owner. So if you are so say you own all of these, you have 3 or 4 LLCs and you own all of them 100%. Well, you can get a FinCEN identifier for yourself. And so then when you report each entity, then you could just report that FinCEN identifier. And so you wouldn't have to provide the information over and over and over and over. But each entity would be a different reporting company. Okay, I think that's it for today. Thank you for everybody for joining. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Paige or Carly, who's been helping us out with this. And if you need any information about the CTA or Venture Vault, we're happy to talk to you about that. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great day.